So good afternoon, everybody who's on here. It's 31 of us at the moment. I've got a feeling a few more may join as we go. So I'm Paul Church, Managing Director of Interquest. Welcome to our ninth webinar. I was just counting up earlier, see exactly where we were. So it's our ninth one today. This is aimed at, but not limited to, our HR, talent and staffing contacts. Thanks so much for tuning in. We've got a good amount of people today. Our group of meetup is nearly 350 people. As a recruiter, I like my targets, and I set myself a target of 500 people on the meetup by Christmas. And I think we'll get there, hopefully in the next 6 weeks or so, the way we're going. So thanks again for tuning in, for sharing it. And please keep doing so. It's good content we've got here. We've had some really good speakers. And we're building a really strong community. And if we keep growing it and keep sharing, then hopefully all our businesses can become just a little bit better. So I'm live from our offices today in Cannon Green in London. And on the journey up here from Brighton today, London seems a lot busier. It's the busiest I've seen London actually since I returned. And it's interesting, that's kind of juxtapositioned, easy for me to say, with the new legislation coming into play this Monday, banning social gatherings of more than 6 people. But we're not here to talk about the message we're getting from our government. Today, we are here to talk about remote performance management. This has actually been the most requested topic we have had since we started these webinars, and I think that's reflected in the attendance we have today, and I think that's still going to grow a little bit. So the format today will be as usual. I'm obviously doing a little intro. I'll intro our speaker. We've got a very good presentation. I know because I've seen it already. Looking forward to seeing that. But throughout, look, this is such an interesting topic, and for many, this is a new phenomenon, remote performance management, as are the market conditions which we're facing right now, whatever your industry, whatever industry you're in. So let's have some questions. Let's have some debate, and please, if you'd like to ask a question, if something comes up in the presentation that you think you'd like to ask a question, put your hand up, and I can invite you to ask a question at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd rather, pop it in the chat, and the actual question, I'm happy to ask it for you. But look, you know, the more you guys get involved, the better. As I said, this is a new phenomenon, remote performance management for many of us. But thankfully, we've got an expert, Kehinde Oluwo. So Kehinde is the global performance management lead for FIS, a global financial technology company. She is responsible for the design, implementation, ongoing leadership of a leading edge performance management approach for all of 55,000 of FIS employees globally. Prior to her current role, Kehinde was a strategy and change consultant with over 15 years experience within the financial services sector, delivering strategic people change initially as a consultant with IBM and in-house with HSBC, Lloyds Banking Group, Barclays Wealth. Kehinde completed a Master's in Organizational Behaviour at Birkbeck University, has a Bachelor of Economics at the University of Durham, and is a chartered member of the Institute of Personnel and Development. So quite a background, Kehinde. So welcome, Kehinde, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul.
So look, really look forward for going through this. So as I said, everybody, if you would like to ask a question, either put your hand up or pop it in the chat, and we'll do it at the end. Kehinde, is there anything else you'd like to add? I gave you an intro there just about your background, or just in terms of why this subject is so important right now.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the intro, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today. What I'm quite keen to do is share with you our journey and a case study. But importantly, it'll be good to hear from everybody on the call as well. I know performance management is one of those ones that can be quite a divisive topic. Some people love it, some people hate it. Whatever happens is a topic that people have an opinion about. Even if you're as an HR professional or as an employee yourself who's gets evaluated or assessed every time. So it's one of those ones which I'm quite keen to hear from people on the call today. So I will leave time for questions, for discussions, and so we can all take away and learn from each other.
Fantastic, thanks, Kehinde. Well, look, I've made you a co-host, so please do share your screen and let's go into it.
Okay. Let me know once you can see.
We can see, all good.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you again. And as Paul mentioned, it's all about remote performance management or performance management that we're now having to do remotely, not because it's in many cases what we all want to do, but it's the situation that we all find ourselves in during this period of time. So I just wanted to start with a little quote from Josh Berzin, which I'm sure many of you on the call are very familiar with. And he just says it like it is: performance management is management. Essentially, as managers, what we do on a day-to-day is to make the most and get the best out of our employees. So the process of managing performance is what managers do. So the reason why this is such a complex topic is because our approach to managing performance really much tells us how we want to run our organization. Most of the reality is that most of the costs in many organizations is the people cost. And employing people, we want to make sure that we make the most and we get the best out of them. There are many philosophies out there, many books that have been written about productivity. So books like the Purpose, Growth Mindset, and talking about how do we ensure that we motivate our employees and get the most out of them. And I think is of the opinion that having clarity, having a sense of purpose and a sense of growth are key engines that drive people and really motivate people to really perform. So the question really is around what are the conditions that we now have around lockdown? What is really driving performance management at this particular point in time? And where are we in the UK in particular, and where are we in terms of being positioned to be able to respond to the new environment that we're in? So particularly, let's talk about the pace of change and then the new normal. The idea of performance management changing or evolving has been around prior to 2020. Over the last 4-5 years, many organizations have been very vocal about the fact that the old way of doing performance is dead. The traditional performance management, as we know it, is usually involves setting goals at the beginning of the year. Then some people have a mid-year process where there's a checkpoint middle of the year, and then there's a very, very formal year-end process where people get rated and they are then informed about how they've performed throughout the year, usually through a number system or a ranking of some sort. And many people tend to follow the bell curve, where there's first distribution, where the organization makes a point of putting people in a particular box just to fit this bell curve. So there has been quite a few interests over the last few years about the fact that the pace of change is so rapid that a process that follows an annual cycle just doesn't cut it. Is not able to meet up to be able to evolve as quickly as everything else is changing. And then if we combine that with the recent situation of COVID this year, we've seen a situation where managers and employees no longer are able to just sit face to face, and you can't just tap your employee over the shoulder and ask them how their day is going and look them in the eye, check whether or not they've done what you've asked them to do. You now have a case where majority of us now work remotely. So it's increasingly very difficult to have those face-to-face conversations and also to be able to evaluate how well someone has done because you now need to trust them and you now need to be able to do this over the video. So there is definitely a burning platform around how do we create a situation where employees are motivated, they are productive, at the same time being able to do it in such a way that we give them what they need at that particular point in time, rather than waiting for 12 months to tell them how they've been doing over the last 12 months, whilst in reality we're having to deliver on a day-to-day basis. So definitely performance management is very interesting at this particular point in time for everybody concerned. So let's have a look at, I'm just admitting people as they come in because I think we have some late joiners. I'll keep doing that. So let's actually have a look at the UK in terms of how we've done in terms of productivity. So there was a survey by which MindGym did a few months ago. And what is very interesting, what some people have said to us about productivity. And essentially what many of remote workers have said is that they actually get away with doing less work every day without their boss even noticing that, on average of 2 hours of 20 minutes less work, which is interesting. And also 2/3 claim that their manager hasn't made a positive impact on their performance during lockdown. And they don't even know what is going on within the wider team. They're just in their little silo, and they're getting on with their work, trying to do as less as possible without their manager noticing that they're not doing as much work. And then they actually then they don't feel as motivated during this lockdown period. I think when we were in the scenario where lockdown was going to be a short-term thing, 2-3 months, maybe many employers would have overlooked this, the fact that we're all having to make adjustments to this new normal. In reality, the idea of working from home now feels longer term. It now feels like it's something that is here to stay. And even if when we return when more people return to work, it's highly likely that many employees would choose to spend parts of their working week working remotely. So it's productivity then becomes very important. How do we ensure that we get our employees to actually want to contribute, want to be productive, and at the same time feel connected to what's happening beyond their immediate role? So I think definitely there's definitely food for thought in this space about what needs to happen next. So just taking a quick look at performance management overall in terms of how we do performance and what we're expecting from performance management. You can see this heavy loads that the performance management man carries, right? Performance management is meant to be doing many things. Usually a data gathering exercise to inform a lot of our processes. Many of us use the information to keep records for legal protection, just in case an employee decides that they want to sue us as an organization. Many of us use it to inform the termination decisions. So if there's going to be a reduction in workforce, for example, most people tend to look at the lowest performing employees first to prioritize the exit from the organization. And then there's the broader, more organizational development and the more strategic part of it around looking at how do we use to engage and develop employees, the link to talent around succession planning, retaining our high potentials, and then fundamentally that year-end process of the merit and linking it to compensation decisions. So there is a lot that is expected from this process. And there is a lot that we want to get out of it. Well, I think I'm not sure though how much of this benefits we are actually leveraging in terms of performance management, because there's so many complaints about performance management overall. There is I can't begin to tell you how much people really detest this process because it doesn't feel good from it. So because obviously I know that many of us on the call, we're just not HR professionals, we're also users, hopefully beneficiaries of performance management. I'm quite keen to understand a bit more from us on the call what our top complaints are about performance management process, either as users of the process or even what people have told us doesn't typically work within our organizations I work in. So please feel free to type into the chat and tell us what your thoughts are about what's happening around performance management for you. So any thoughts, any feedback about performance? Yeah, I can hear time consuming. We don't really see or understand the benefits. The process, it can be a surprise when things aren't going well and people are underperforming, it's outdated. It's frustrating. The first ranking can be frustrating, definitely. And feedback, yes, a little too late. Excellent. So I think if you feel negative, definitely. So thank you for sharing some of your complaints of about performance management. This is really helpful, because I think it's not a complete surprise, because this is real. Even as professionals that work in the HR space, we are people that experience the process. And one of the things that we will talk about is around how do we as HR experience the performance management process, and at the same time make sure that we are not, however we experience it determines our engagement with the business overall. So in terms of what we are seeing as the complaints, then I think the complaints tend to fall primarily into two buckets. One is around usefulness being too low and the efforts being too high. And when we talk about the usefulness being too low, this is the fact that people feel that it's disengaging, it's not motivating. It tends to be built for individuals, where in reality, where we are working in more collaborative spaces, where we're working across multiple types of teams. We don't necessarily, we're not always able to attribute what we deliver to us as individuals, but because we're collaborating so much. And at the same time, there's little sight to what's really going on in relation to the business priorities. And it just doesn't align with the needs of the business in terms of the utility. The other point is around the effort. I think many of you have already covered that today, which is around the fact that it feels like it's time consuming. It feels at the same time that it's just too much we're asking from managers and employees to remember everything they've done in the last 12 months or the last 6 months. And also the fact that it just feels like it takes too much time to do. So one of the things that we always kind of try to focus our minds on is around the utility of our performance, right? In terms of the what does it mean for a process to be useful, such as this? I think the real definition that is out there, which Gartner tends to focus on, is around how well does it deliver to the needs of the employee and to actually help the business to achieve these goals. Because if you remember, we talked about the fact that managing performance or performance management is exactly what managers do. How we run our organization very much relies on this process. So to what extent does this process help employees to feel motivated and to feel personally productive, and then to actually help the business to achieve these goals as a result of that? So one of the things I want to just talk about before we go into the case study is around the improving utility of performance management. A lot of projects or a lot of organizations that want to think about how they improve performance management and make it work for them remotely, or as we now operate, tend to focus on reducing the effort. Let's reduce how long it takes for managers to complete forms. Let's make the forms shorter. Let's think about how we make sure that the technology is better in terms of the tool. But a lot of survey and lots of organizations have actually noticed that when you focus on the effort, it doesn't give you as much return as much as focus on the utility. So the overall guidance and direction is around focus on utility, make it useful for the end users, make it useful for employees, make it useful for managers, and then make it useful for the organization. And there are 3 key strategies and that we want to talk about today, that talks about how to improve the utility of performance to make so that it gives us what we need. The first one is around making a business driven, and we'll talk about that a little more on the next slide. Making sure it's employee guided, and then making sure it's work centered in terms of the way we now work. Instead of focusing on the traditional, old school, outdated way, work is now being done differently. A lot of us, I'm sure, are very much tapped into the idea about the future of work, about working collaboratively. How well is our performance management aligned to the way we actually do work today, is a question that we need to ask ourselves. So let's first talk about it being business driven. So I think the business driven part of it just goes to the fundamental part of the design, right? I think many of us have inherited processes and we just copy what other organizations do. And that's very long, cumbersome. It's almost like performance management is designed to be a process that punishes people. But in reality, if we go out to ask the fundamental question around the design philosophy, the key thing that we've noticed that's worked for us is around design thinking and making sure that we customize and focus on customization. And the reason why this is important is that typically for a process such as this, we think is HR owned. So HR tends to lead the design of the process, and then we get some input from the business to help us think about it at some point further down the line. But in reality, because managing performance impacts the bottom line, this is an organizational owned process. It may sit in HR as a guardian of the process, but fundamentally, what we found is that in HR, in reality, we are sometimes too far away from the everyday reality of the business to be able to make, to be able to get feedback that helps us to make effective design decisions. So the design thinking part of it and working with the business and making sure that the input of the business is part of this from day one is critical to enable us to identify what the fundamental aspects, what the process should be. That's fundamental one of them. The second one is around, let's take customization as given. Obviously, life is simpler where everything is consistent and where everybody does the same thing all the time. In reality, we want to be individuals and we want things to be personalized to our needs. So one of the things that we need to think about is around to what extent can we customize our performance management process without compromising on some aspects of it as well. So identify what is core to you in terms of as the core aspect of the process, where you want to be the same for everybody across the organization. But there are always levers, right? There's always room to customize. And I'll share with you some of the ways in which we've customized our process without compromising the core fundamental about what's important to us as FIS. Then the other points around the co-creation and the design input, right? So we, rather than going away as an HR function and then coming out with a glossy, shiny new process, when we started to think about designing performance management, we thought actually everybody hates this process. Nobody likes it. So why don't we give them the opportunity to help us tell us what the new process is going to be? So co-designing was a key fundamental part of what we wanted to do. We went out, we got executives involved, managers involved, employees involved, and then actually got their feedback around what does good look like for you? If you're going to experience this process, what will this feel like? So part of it was around that co-creation of the process, including even naming what the new process needs to be and part of the change journey and getting people's buy-in to the process. Then the other points around leveraging data and impact. So what impact are we looking to make? And how do we measure when we are being successful? And then the other point is around being quite clear that we can't be everything to everybody day one. So staggering the delivery and staggering and managing expectations about this was also critical to this. The next point is around being employee owned, right? So, so apart from co-creation, within the actual performance management process itself, we need to be quite clear about roles and responsibilities. So who owns performance management? Managers manage performance, but the employee needs to be motivated and needs to be willing to engage. And we need to be quite clear what parts of the process the employees needed to lead in terms of, for example, making sure that they schedule the regular conversations with the manager, making sure that they actually initiated the process. And then we recognized quite quickly that manager capability was important. Managers are the linchpin of everything that we do around performance. And we, even in spite of people having years and years of experience, we wanted to make sure that we understood and provided tools and resources in a consistent way to managers. So building capability and working with a number of partners across our HR function really enabled us to get our managers ready to adopt this new way of managing performance. And then the link to other talent processes, right? So we didn't want performance to stand in isolation or just be seen as a way you make decisions in relating to merit. So part of it is around making sure performance was relevant in terms of talent management, in terms of high pose, in terms of making sure that we talked about this even as part of our EVP going forward in certain markets. Having a leading edge performance management was a good way to attract candidates. And so we wanted to just make sure that everything was interlinked and make sure it was a platform to drive everything that we did across the organization. So I'm just going to talk about some specifics now about what we've been doing at FIS for the last 2 years in terms of getting ready, how this way of managing performance has enabled us to thrive during this period of remote working, and what some of those fundamentals are that we now have in place that's allowed us to really pivot nicely over the last 9 months. So I guess our burning platform really was really driven by a survey that we took that took place in 2018. So there are lots of verbal feedback as during the regular employee opinion survey that talked about performance manager. We just hate this process. We hate this first ranking distribution. It's not great. It's not relevant. So, some of the things that have been mentioned on the call today. Well, actually, why don't we find out specifically about performance and just understand a bit more about the data, what's really going on in the organization. So this is one of the data points which was very interesting. Out of the people that we surveyed, and we made sure was kind of quite varied across geographies, employee experience, about different business areas, around 46% of them felt that the process was only 46% of them felt the process was effective and efficient. The majority of people in the organization felt that the performance management process was ineffective and inefficient. So even if we think about what performance is meant to be doing, is meant to be helping us drive performance, is meant to be helping us be successful, to be able to adjust and go out in the marketplace, to be able to get employees to be productive. Majority of people disagreed that this process was doing that. And then we looked at teams where people had regular feedback and they had that clarity about goals. There was a 35% reduction in attrition in those teams. So where people really embraced the key fundamentals about effective performance management, as we said, many of those folks were quite happy in the organization. They were staying, they were being high productive, and they're quite happy to stay. So, so these two data points, one of the key ones that really help drive our call to action and to help us really get to the attention of senior executives. And as we said, we didn't want this to be an HR initiative. This was needed to be a business initiative. So obviously high attrition means you need to recruit more people and you're spending more money on employees in terms of replacement, and then the lost productivity. And the fact that you had thousands of hours being spent on an ineffective and inefficient process really got people's attention. So in terms of what next then, what we did was we really thoroughly embraced the old concept of the business design, or the design thinking of having a business-led approach. So firstly, we one of the things that we wanted people to do was we expressed an interest about wanting to change the performance management process itself, and high level of interest in terms of even naming what the process was. The key things that we did was make sure that the design was iterative, made it quite clear we're not designing and then not ever having to change it. This was a flexible design that needed to meet the organizational needs at that point in time, but needs to be able to evolve as the needs of the business changes. And then crowdsourcing, as we said. So one of the things that we crowdsourced was the name of the process. So Performance 365 was actually a name. We ran a campaign across the organization about what should we call this new process, given our aspirations for it. So the Performance 365 is a combination of two names that were suggested by employees, I think one in Canada and the other one in India. And that really got the excitement going. The idea of actually wanting to transform, and the idea of the HR function wanting people to input got everybody's attention. And we had so many ideas about what was working, what wasn't working. And we immediately got people into working groups to help us to start to co-create and think about what the new process needed to look like to meet their needs. And as we said before, we didn't want just focus on customization, on standardization. The difficult path was, how do you customize without compromising on certain standards? Okay, so this I'll skip. I think one of the things that came out was that we're able to create a clear statement around what the value of performance management was for employees, for managers, for actual business, and then the people office, which is our HR function. And this was the message, and this was consistent all the way through around. If we're not delivering this, then in terms of our design, then we're not being successful. And we need to make sure everybody understood that they had a stake and they had something to benefit from engaging with the process. So I just wanted to focus around the design thinking part in terms of opportunities for customization. So one of the things that was quite clear was that the role of the people office, the TPO, is what we call our HR function, was around providing tools and guidance, but understanding from the business what they needed. So everything at this particular point in time was potentially up for grabs around goal setting, feedback, reviews, ratings, and calibration. And then we identified opportunities for customization around the structure of the process, how frequently it happens, priorities in terms of what we prioritize, in terms of what happens when, and also the content. And one of the things that we made a decision earlier on was around the structure and the frequency was going to be a core standard that wasn't going to change, regardless of where you are within the organization. The performance 365 process was going to be the same, fundamental, and then it was going to happen 4 times a year. It was going to become a quarterly process, which aligned with our reporting cycle across the business. But we also understood that people were quite different in terms of what they needed. For example, that our graduate population had some key skills and some key areas of performance that needed to be focused on the first 2 years whilst they were on the grad program. So those, for those folk, the content, even though it was 4 times a year, the content varied in terms of the questions and the format. For our sales organization, the quantitative aspects of sales was measured through our Microsoft Dynamics sales system. So what we needed to do was make sure that whatever we were doing on a quarterly basis linked to the quantitative side, so that it doesn't become divorced from the reality of what they needed to do. So they got the numbers from Microsoft Dynamics, which we linked to, and then we did the reflection around on a quarterly basis, what is really happening here on the qualitative side. And then the other points was around things like finance, right? They mentioned to us, okay, you're following a quarterly cycle, similar to legal. The month end, the quarter end and the beginning of the quarter are a period of where we're very, very busy. And it's going to be very difficult for us to having those conversations during that time. So can you, when you're thinking about the timing, can you take that into consideration? So for parts of the organization, that having those design thinking sessions, having the close alignment and feedback enabled us to think about what the process and the structure was going to be. So therefore getting their buy-in as a result of that. So what did we end up with? We ended up with an approach that was really driven by 4 key things. The whole idea of anytime goals, anytime feedback. So Workday is our main system. So anytime throughout the year, you can set your goals and adjust your goals. And that's just to reflect with the business reality. Goal setting isn't just something that happens at the beginning of the year. And this is really shining during this period, right? Because for COVID and remote working, most of the goals that most people set in January is not what they're working to at this point in time. And I think many of you, if you're in a sales role, for example, whatever your targets were at the beginning of the year is probably not what you're working to now. The ability to be able to adjust and make changes and that flexibility really has really helped us. And the other idea is anytime feedback as well. So feedback is not something that happens when you're about to do your performance review in June and December. Many of us are working in a project-based environment and working with people that are not necessarily our managers. So the idea is that you finish a piece of work, you do something that you want to focus on, you get your feedback in time at that particular point in time and utilize the feedback. And then the feedback is visible to your manager anyway as a result of that. So the overall concept of just developing and growing and being able to be quite clear about what your objectives was fundamental to us. And then the other one is around alignment to the quarterly cycle. So we report as any listed organization, there's a quarterly reporting cycle. So the idea was to make sure that every quarter, every 3 months, everybody gets to at least have a formal conversation. In addition to their one-to-ones, of course, there is that conversation that is the check-in, where you look back on the previous quarter. What did you achieve? How did it go? Look forward and have a conversation about, so what am I planning for the next 3 months? What are my priorities? And then the third question, very important, was development. So what do I need in terms of growth and development, and who do I need it from? And how can you as my manager support me to do that? So, and this has been very important for us as well during this period of remote working, because we now have a period where regardless of what's happening externally in terms of COVID, we have an opportunity where managers and employees are having to connect. And because this was deployed in 2019, it has become the norm. It's not something we're just trying to do now. It's just, the expectation is just there. And then the other point, I guess more is the rating scale, which is a 3-point rating scale. So we wanted to move away from this forced ranking of to get to the point of where we have a broader rating scale, and is really 3 points are exceptional, successful, and needs improvement. And majority of people are successful, right? So if you meet your goals, you're successful. That feel good factor where performance doesn't feel like you're being penalized is around you feeling good and being part of the organization in that process. I'm just going to skip through a couple of slides. So the 3 questions I mentioned is around that look back, look forward, and develop are the key areas. And the idea is around, the emphasis is around you have a form that you complete about your look forward, the through questions. The manager does the same, and then there's a conversation. And the emphasis was around the conversation. We want people talking and having a conversation, reflect and move on. And throughout the year, when you get to Q3, for example, you'd have seen what's been happening throughout the year. You've been receiving your coaching and your conversation at that point in time, at the point where you need it, and it builds up over time. So the key challenges for us was around how do we implement this approach, given that we were in the traditional mode of beginning of the year to mid-year and year end, and how do we even get managers to buy into this, and how do we know that they're actually talking to each other, they're just not completing a form and then clicking submit. All right, so we needed to really make sure that this was we committed to this, and this was seen as a big transformational effort. So part of it was around the commitment from our leadership and the sponsorship, and at the same time making sure that second point of being employee centered. The real way that we got that was through our change management. So significant change management effort in terms of buying from the executives, creating a team of our local change enablement team, and that were a combination of people from HR and people from the business. So this was around moving performance to become owned by everybody. And so really, for it to be owned by everybody, we needed buy-in from and everyone's participation. And then fundamentally, the other thing that we did do that was different was we created local deployment plans. So each location, each regional deployment team had their own ideas about what worked for them in their location, based on their unique business needs, based on their unique organization needs. And all we needed to do was provide the guidance from the center, so that it became owned and the Performance 365 process globally became their process as it works for them. And that's part of that ownership piece of wanting to do it regardless of what's happening centrally. So we also focused on building manager capability, lots of resources for managers, lots of training, in terms of getting their buy-in around having feedback conversations. And most recently, we've created new resources around how do you get new joiners to be effective during their probationary periods. Very important for us, because many people have 6 months probation period. They're working remotely now. They're not seeing their team members. They probably would have had, they were looking forward to coming into the office, the first day in the office, meeting people that they would work with, understanding who their stakeholders are. None of that is happening now. It's all remote. So how do we ensure that during those first 6 months, we don't lose people and they don't become demotivated? So we had some tips in place for managers, covering things around the onboarding pace, and at the same time, making sure that they are assigned even a virtual buddy for people. They really set the goals and get people to participate in those quarterly connect conversations. So we're quite deliberate around improving performance from the probationary period to the actual quarterly connect itself. And we've had quite a few changes in the last 12 months since we deployed performance management. And I'll just cover what those things are. So one of the things that we did notice in terms of the impact was that more people were setting their goals, 2.5 times goals set in terms of number of goals. We had lots of more individuals who were using feedback. So feedback, as we saw, 10 times. And I think mainly due to the philosophy of the fact that we're really committed to this, and was quite publicly communicated what the schedule is for the next 12 months about what's happening. For us though, in addition to COVID in 2020, there were other things on our minds in our organization. The first big one was integration. FIS acquired WellPay, the payments business, about 10,000 employees last year. And one of the things that we wanted to do was use performance management as a platform for our integration. And kind of a way to really drive the culture and bring the new employees to be part of the way we do things at FIS. And this has really been an enabler for integration this year because it was very much established. We found that many of the heritage WellPay folks, very similar, they had a traditional way of managing performance. But when they saw that the FIS folks were just getting ready for the quarterly connect and getting on with it, that really sent the message about how important this was across the organization. So it has really helped in integration. The other one was around it being focusing on the quality of conversations. So last year, as I said, what gets measured gets done. The drive was on adoption, making it quite clear that it was all about the quarterly conversations, about anytime goals, anytime feedback. And this year, the people of his HR function pulled back and said, actually, let's see what happens when we don't drive hard on the messaging and see what people say and what people do. And interestingly enough, we get asking questions. When are the quarterly connects happening? People from the business wanted to know what's happening around performance management. They wanted to be part of the quarterly connect to take place. And we focused this year around the quality of the conversations around. It's not just enough. It's given now that everybody's having a conversation and talking regularly. It's around what are you talking about? What's the impact this is having on the business? How is it helping you to be personally productive? So in year 2 then, where are we? We've had, just focus on lower part, we had the Q1, Q2 conversation just finished, and we had 90% of our organization participate in the connects for this year. And we asked the question, how well did your conversation help you in terms of being productive? And 85% of people said they had helpful conversations in terms of being motivated and being productive. So I think it's fair to say that we continue to evolve the process, we continue to change it, and we are keeping, I think we are keeping very much close to paying attention to what is going on to make sure that we continue to evolve it to the business, to the business's needs. So there are a number of key enablers that we've talked about here, and that's really helped us on the journey. And fundamentally, what this means is that we've been able to thrive remotely. Throughout this period, we continue to set expectations with anytime goals, anytime feedback, making sure people are clear about their goals, making sure people are continue to use, have those regular conversations, created new resources to support managers throughout this period because we recognize that many people are managing remote teams for the first time. And we've just committed to that schedule of anytime goals and that performance being all year round. So I'm just going to, I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Sorry, I was just unmuting myself. Thanks, Kehinde. That was fantastic. Really, really thorough. We've got a few questions in the chat. I've got a couple myself, but I'll read out one straight away from Buki. I think it's Buki or Buki. Could you share more on some of the tips for managing a remote new hire?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done is around the onboarding process, right? So for us, for a new hire, we don't expect you to have a quarterly conversation for the first 2 months. So the expectation in the first couple of months is around goal setting, making sure that you are aware of what your goals are, making sure that you know that, and understand the overall philosophy end to end. So as part of the onboarding process, Performance 365 is included as part of that. And then for managers in particular, we've asked that for new hires, there are some practical aspects, right? If, for example, your computer doesn't show up on the first day, then you don't really care about your goals, or you don't care about anything else. So being pragmatic, making sure that you get the practicals right. And at the same time, when the new joiner has started, having those regular meetings in the diary, introducing them virtually to their teammates, supporting them on those virtual calls, and introducing them to their virtual stakeholders, and then just outlining a plan and making it quite clear what the overall philosophy and what the expectations are during this particular period.
Perfect. Thank you, Kehinde. Anybody else who's got any questions, please do put in the chat box. If we need to overrun by 5 or 10 minutes, we can. A question for me, I suppose this is just in relation to a conversation we had yesterday, and something that I've been asked constantly, and I've actually asked myself, is it fair to judge people by the same standards now as perhaps we would have judged them by 6 months ago, based on the market, what's going on in the world? What is your opinion around that?
Yeah, I think is what is fair is that we give people the opportunity to be productive and do their best work at this point in time. So if people are getting the coaching that they need, people are getting the feedback, they're getting the support that they need, and their goals are realigned and to reflect the new reality, then definitely, because the business is for those of us that work in private sector, there's still that accountability in terms of business expectations to make money, and the business is still there in terms of generate revenue. But I think what is not fair is if at the beginning of the year you set the goals in January, nothing has been done, and then you show up in December rating people and giving them a rating without doing anything in between. Is that overall adjustment and recognizing, and I was speaking to a colleague this morning, we talked about assessing with empathy, right? What conditions did people have to do their work this year? How have they adjusted? How have they utilized the feedback? What's been happening? And then making sure that we still then give them an idea of how well they performed. People still want to know how they performed at the end of the year.
Absolutely. And then going to a question we got earlier in the chat boxes just came to me. So how often do you review the actual review process? So you said it's been 2 years in the making, but do you adjust and amend regularly the actual process itself?
Yes, we do every quarter. We do because we have to. So when we first launched the process in January 2019, our focus was around just getting the overall philosophy understood and getting everybody to really buy into it. But at the end of that first quarterly connect, as we call them, we did run focus groups. We interviewed the champions who helped us to roll it out within the business, our business partners and senior leaders, to understand how the experience felt for them. And what we did identify at that point in time is that people were great with the look back. They knew what they had done. They're great with the look forward in terms of their goals, what they're going to focus on for the next 3 months. But development was an issue. People were not quite clear. What do I do around development? Is it a case of my longer term development plan, or is it a case of my development for the first 3 months? Who do I go to? So development was an issue. As a result of that, Q2 last year was focused on creating a development toolkit and getting people to share their stories about development. So we evolved, we analyze in real time after every quarterly connect and think about what we need to focus on for next quarter. And by the time we got to Q3 last year, the announcement about the integration, the acquisition of WorldPay had been made. So lots of people were nervous. So that time was focused around thriving in the period of change. How do you continue to maintain a level of productivity even when you're uncertain about what might happen to your role, for example? So the whole idea was around getting people to focus around that conversation around developing resilience, being focused on managing their teams through change and themselves through change. So Q4 last year was all about getting people to rate for the first time in the 3-point rating scale. So that was in itself was a fundamental change. So every quarter there's something new happening, and that keeps us very much aligned with the business. What does the business need? And how can we use the performance management process to support and help the business achieve its goals is where we're at.
Okay, thank you. And a question from Owen. does an organization's culture impact performance management?
Yes, very interesting question. I think it does, right? Because, and I'll answer the question in two ways. One is that the type of performance management process that you end up with very much depends on the culture within your organization. Because there are many, a lot of the things that we've talked about here isn't new in terms of anytime goals, anytime feedback. What is different is around how you implement, right? Because the way you implement has to suit the culture of your organization. We knew that the only way to really get this really embedded within our organization was through that customization. The salespeople, if you're talking about performance management process, which doesn't tackle their sales quota, that is not reality to them. People in finance, if you're telling them to have these regular conversations at quarter end when they're trying to balance the numbers, that's not reality. So we need to understand what the culture was important to our stakeholders, and that's what we've done. The other point is around the impact performance itself can have on the culture. I think performance is management is definitely one of those key levers that we can use to drive the culture of organization. Many of us talk about the culture of driving high performance culture. The only way you can drive high performance culture is where people have clarity of goals, there's accountability, the capability is already there within the organization, and you're reinforcing and recognizing what good looks like. So I think performance management is definitely a key platform in terms of enabling culture.
Okay, great. Thanks, Owen. Any more questions, please do pop in the chat. Another one from me. What's your opinion on whether we should shift in general in the UK in terms of the nature of our working contracts? So instead of it being kind of go to this office, work from 9 till 5, obviously no one works 9 to 5 anymore, you know what I mean? Work from 9 to 5, do this, do that. Do you think we should move away from that and move into more of a purely deliverables-based working contract? And is that feasible?
Well, I think there are a number of key enablers that we need to put in place, right? Because there's some people that like that constance of I'm tied to a particular contract. And so I think those people's needs to continue to be accommodated. It's about customization. But at the same time, the overall idea of portfolio working is something that people are beginning to think about around having a contract and just being able to get rewarded for your deliverables and outcomes. And you could potentially, for example, Paul, could potentially be contracted to work for 5 different people. And you get paid for the outcomes that you deliver. I think we are seeing that there is potentially that trend. Even though we're remote working, people may not necessarily identify with one unique employer. And the way we are working right now certainly is beginning to move us towards that direction.
Cool, thank you. And another question that came in earlier, was there, you mentioned you review the review process every 3 months, the Performance 365. Was there anything that stood out that you had to change at the end of March this year, once lockdown hit? Was there anything that stood out that you had to make an amendment around?
Yes, and that's one thing I wasn't able to go to into the presentation. When lockdown started, we had published our timeline for 2020. And the way the current process works is that we have a 6-week period. The last 2 weeks of the quarter to the first 4 weeks of the next quarter, where we have this quarterly connect period. So middle of March to end of April was meant to be our Q1 connect. But the idea, at that point in time, everybody was just trying to respond to COVID. Everyone's just focusing around the fact that we now need to work remotely. There was so much going on in the organization. And we asked ourselves the question, is this a point where we are rigid and we then say, we make a decision to still go ahead with the quarterly connect, given all the effort that we need to put into helping people to just be and help you to be productive. So there was a lot of debate within the leadership team, and the proposal, what we ended up doing was to actually not have a Q1 connect and move that to having a combined Q1 and Q2 connect at the end of June. So and I think that's part of the other thing around agility and flexibility, right? Rather than being rigid, responding to a business need at that point in time. So we moved it till the end of June, but at the same time, people could still move their goals and adjust their goals, which is what people are starting to do, to say, actually, my goal in January, February is no longer what my goal is now. People could still get feedback, But that formal conversation took place in June. So we needed to move quickly, and that's what we did to kind of adjust ourselves to align with what the business needed.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kehinde. Well, look, I think we're finished with the questions now. But look, I appreciate such a thorough presentation. A big project, 2 years in the making. So, and obviously the scale. You're talking about a 55,000 person business. So, really, really good case study for everyone here. So, if anybody wants to contact you and ask you questions directly, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just do a quick search for me, and then I'm quite happy to answer any questions that you may have. That's absolutely fine.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much. I know how busy you are, so thank you for spending an hour with us today and sharing all of that. And everybody, thank you for attending. We had about kind of 38 people here at one point, so I know it's really well received. We're going to have a week off next week, and then following that, we've got the next 5 or 6 weeks booked up. I'll be launching in terms of our next webinars. We're going to be talking about improving mental being in the office, mental well-being, sorry. We're going to be talking about gender bias in the workplace. We've got some speakers on the future of HR. What does the role of HR look like? We've got a couple of speakers talking around employee value proposition, and we're going to have a session on mindfulness. So lots of content coming up, but a week off next week. Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for attending. Thanks again for Kehinde and for sharing everything today. And yeah, I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.